Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm delighted to say that I'm here with Colm Feore, one of the country's best actors and most familiar faces. He's been working at the Stratford Festival most of his career, doing the biggest roles from Romeo, King Lear, Hamlet, Macbeth, many others. He's right now in Stratford, Ontario, where I believe the reopening laws are slightly more permissive than they are here in Toronto. He starred in the most iconic Canadian films, 32 short films about Glenn Gould, a true masterpiece, Bon Cop, Bad Cop, and of course the mini-series about the current Prime Minister's dad. You've also seen him in major American movies and TV series, West Wing, Law and Order, 24, House of Cards. I've spent most of my life watching him doing Shakespeare and seeing him pop up on screens big and small, jumping up and down saying, "Oh, there's Colm Feore." He's currently starring as the eccentric billionaire in the Netflix series, The Umbrella Academy, which I hope to ask him about. This summer, he was scheduled to play Richard III at Stratford and to open the new, massively renovated Tom Patterson Theatre. The opening of the festival this season collided with the coronavirus and was put to a halt. Now Stratford is begging the federal government for support to survive, and the actors are wondering when and how they will work again. Thank you so much, Colin, for joining us tonight. First of all, allow me to ask you, how are you doing?
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. I'm doing fine, he said slightly cautiously. You know, fine for somebody who's been out of work for months with no prospect of more coming. And the work that we'd spent a year and a half preparing for, not sure when and if that will happen. So, you know, we have good days and we have bad days.
Fair enough. I think that's true of all of us. I would like to go back a little bit to your childhood. I'm sure this is a period where you've had a lot of time on your hands and you've been able to reflect a little on the past. And I wanted to know how you first understood that you wanted to become an actor. You grew up in Windsor, Ontario, which I do not think of as a fountain of theatrical activity, but maybe I'm wrong about that. At what point did you realize you had a calling?
Wow, just on the University of Windsor and Windsor itself, Anthony Cimolino, artistic director of the festival and the director of My Richard III, Coriolanus, King Lear, Beau Stratagem, Windsor grad. So, you know, not bad. Stephen Ouimet, Tom McCamus, Windsor grads. So
I stand corrected.
No, it's just, you know, just like a couple of names to drop early in the game. But I started back in school in Windsor doing plays and being hopelessly awkwardly embarrassed about doing them. I don't know why I was chosen. I was, you know, playing some kind of king in some sort of pageant. And I was just, it was hideous. It was in French, of course, because I went to a French school for primary school, because my Irish parents thought that might be the best way to integrate into the Canadian ideal. And maybe I could work for the government one day, was my dad's angle on that. And I remember thinking it was a really horrible business. So there were girls putting fingers through my hair and offering me grapes. And I just thought, oh, like, this is bad. It got better. I went off to school in St. Catharines, and they want to do theater shows as well. So, you know, in grade 7, 8, 9, I was doing shows and thinking, well, this isn't bad. And there was some very good guidance at my school. There were a couple of teachers who were, you know, a militarist Scotsman who was very, very keen on us being very, very good. And so it was a disciplined environment, but very creative. And as I went on into the high school version of the school, we did exponentially more. The Simpson Sears Drama Festival, in-house plays, school plays, all kinds of things. And so by the end of my high school career, I was, you know, a fairly indifferent student. I didn't shine at anything particularly. And I thought, well, I'm going to go off to university, maybe if anybody accepts me, and be a middle of the road student. Maybe I could be a teacher if something really takes my interest. But one of my teachers there, Victor Bowman, now alas dead, was the drama teacher at my school. And he said, you know, you could apply to the universities, but you could also apply to the National Theatre School of Canada, and you could audition for them. I said, well, what exactly does that entail? And how could I do it? He said, well, we'll apply together and I'll take you to it, which he did. And I ended up in my final year of high school in front of Douglas Rain, whom I then had the pleasure of working with here in Stratford much later, who was leaving the school as artistic director, but ushering in the last class before he did. And I did a pretty incompetent job of some of Romeo and Juliet for him, amongst other things. I recently got the notes from my audition because Elisa Palmer, who is the artistic director of the theater school, has a vicious sense of humor. And on the occasion of some award I was given, said, "Guess what we found? Let me just, tell you what you were like in 1977." And apparently, I showed up in a jacket, a tie, gray flannels, the whole thing, and I called everybody sir. And this was noted in the program. And I don't know if that helped or hindered, but I then found out totally by accident, because Victor Bowman had also been teaching Jack Bloom, who runs Real Canada in Toronto and across the country, which is film in high schools, on which, of course, I'm on the board. Jack was at NTS at the time. He said, "Oh, I see Colm got in." "And how do you know?" says Victor. "Well, there's a sign saying incoming student September, blah, blah, blah." And I was then given the information, and I phoned my parents and said, "Listen, I have to tell you, there are options. Guelph has accepted me, Windsor, but apparently the National Theatre School has also accepted me." And I got the shock of my life when they said, "Oh, yes, sorry, we meant to tell you about that. The letter came to the house, and it was time sensitive, so we opened it and then responded, and we've accepted." And I thought, okay, and that was the start.
And why did they keep that secret?
I don't think it was so much secret as a timing thing.
Right.
They just thought, oh yeah, did you tell him? No, did you tell him? And you have to keep in mind, this was, the 18th century. A parrot, or rather a pigeon, had to have a note tied to its leg and thrown out like a Harry Potter owl. So, lines of communication were not quite as swift as they are now.
I'm curious, you mentioned you were sent to a French school, and obviously this was effective. You're fluent in French, you act in French. This is a big part of your career. As the mother of someone whose kid is in French immersion, I'm wondering, what was it that worked for you? How did that stick?
Well, confessions being they are, I have to tell you, my French is terrible. And my French was terrible when I left school, L'École Georges Péfanier in Windsor. Though Windsor, I have to say, has the greatest concentration of French schools. And we had the first French high school long before anybody else even thought about it. And all of my friends were Séguin, Montcalm, Pomerleau, Godin, and you thought, there's a lot of French Canadians here. And it certainly put some patterns, structure in my ear. But then I went off to school in St. Catharines and wasn't asked to do French above a grade 2 level for another many, many years. It wasn't until I got to the National Theatre School and thought, well, this might be useful, that I polished some of it up. And then mostly it was after having played Trudeau, where his French was impeccable, and not particularly a Québécois French. And so I thought, well, I better get better at that, and polished it up only for the purpose of the show. But soon after that came Bon Cop, Bad Cop. And then there was an assumption in the street, and particularly in the streets of Montreal, where I attempt, because I think it's respectful, to simply speak in French first. In a shop, in a bar, in a restaurant, wherever I am, I'll try to speak French first. And if they realize I'm hopeless and speak to me in English, I will soldier on. But I felt that there was an expectation that I could speak French. And so now every day, I do speak French a little bit here by myself, along with some Shakespeare, to polish it, to make it better. And I really do work on it every day. For your son or daughter who is looking at this, I will pass on the advice that I was given. A, do it all the time, and B, read a couple of pages of Voltaire aloud every day. And apparently that works. I'm doing Cyrano de Bergerac, Don Juan, classical plays and bits that I've played and remember, just to, accorder mes oreilles and things like that. But it's entirely pretend. And I can tell you why I know it's pretend. We were in a bar, oyster bar, in Sète on a cruise, my wife and I, with a very lovely Australian couple. And we didn't go to the tourist oyster place. We went to the récolteurs and the, Madame et Sœur et Frère and all that kind of stuff, right at the end of the pier, which meant that it was pretty much exclusively French. Now the Australians and the Canadians bundled along. We sat down. There were a couple of French people at the table at a distance, and the waiter was engaging them in conversation and ignoring us because he could hear us speaking English with various accents that he either did or did not recognize. And my wife said, "Well, just speak to him in French." I said, "Oh, no, dear, I'm far too shy." Well, no, really, you have. And after 20 minutes, out of frustration, I launched into what was the first lesson for anyone who doesn't speak French. And please, at home, take notes. French is actually rather simple. You need a few gestures and a few vowels. So, for example, the gestures are lifting and lowering the shoulders and maybe the hands, just a little bit of that. And the vowels you need are O, A, O, and maybe occasionally meld thrown in. So when finally, after 20 or 30 minutes, I needed this guy's attention and was despairing of ever getting an oyster or a glass of pink wine, I was, there was nothing actually French about that. But he was got wine, we got shrimps, oysters, everything. And I thought, there's something to this. Now, my wife, who's very, I'm sure you speak English beautifully. And he did. And I just wanted to punch him, but that's just because he was French. Made me mad.
You mentioned your famous Trudeau performance. And I realize you've spent much of your career going back and forth between Canada and the States, working in both cultures, both countries, and also studying some of the great heroes and icons of Canada. And I'm wondering, when you think about the relationship between the two countries and what distinguishes them, how do you characterize the Canadian identity? What sets us apart?
Well, I think it's probably most obvious in our comedians and all of our Canadian comedians who've made such, inroads and had such immense success in the States, because we have a slightly outsider view of their world, and we can sort of comment gently, respectfully, but laser-like, and just go, this is the problem, right? And I'm just saying, I don't want to put you off, I don't want to offend, but seems to me, when you go from Jim Carrey, Mike Myers, Aykroyd, John Candy, the list goes on. So, we have that. I would also say that we have a huge advantage as Canadian artists because the community is small, because our opportunities for work are much, much fewer. We tend to all have to be able to do a little bit of everything. So that by the time we get to America, we're pretty fantastically skilled. Most of our people have done radio, television, film, theater, and they don't see it exclusively. In America, it can be a bit more rigid. There are television actors, there are film actors, and there are theater actors, and never the three shall meet. We don't think like that, and we don't behave like that, and so we don't train like that. So our abilities are way more like the British actors, from whom we've stolen the best of what we've begun with, or at least half of it. The other half, I would say, respectfully, of both of these cultures, the British tradition and the American tradition, is that we respect rehearsal, repetition, clarity, intelligence, devotion, discipline. All of the things that England has given from its theater, its parliamentary system. There's stuff that's good there to steal. But we also kind of love the idea of the method and being true and bleeding and sweating and loving and just going, no, that is the thing itself, right? And marrying passion, technique, and truthfulness. And that, I think, makes us employable.
Wow, that's a full and excellent answer. Thank you for that. At what point in your career, your border crossing career, did you decide to buy a house in Stratford?
I've never not had a house in Stratford, rented, or since 1980, 81, my first season here. I've lived here now over 40 years, and I've never lived in the States. The one time I did live, I mean, I was born in the States, so I'm an American. But the one time I did go and live in the US, apart from long engagements, was when we were doing the season 7 of 24. And my wife, Donna, brilliant director and choreographer, knows what it's like to be on the road. And so she said, look, we'll get you an apartment in Venice. It's fabulous. You'll go and do this. And so for the first time in my career, I actually had a place. What I had done up until that point, and I'm now old enough and wizened enough to be able to admit it. I don't think they'll hold it against me, but I only ever pretended that I was moving to LA. So I would go in on what I called surgical strikes and go, look, I'm just going to be right back with you. I'm here to audition. I'm going to do a few things. I've got a job to do, but then I've got to get back. My wife's got a show. I've got some stuff to do, but we're coming. Oh my gosh, we'll be right with you. And I've kept doing this for about 20 years. But in one moment, I had an opportunity to have the apartment. It made sense. We were doing a series, not something I'd done before. And wouldn't you know, right smack in the middle of it, the writers go on strike. And in 24's case, the writers were the producers, were the blah, blah, blah. And I was in the middle of doing a Clint Eastwood movie, season 7 of 24, and everything stopped. I'm not going to sit here alone in an apartment in Venice when I should be home cooking and taking care of the kids and everything else. So I came home, and 5 months later, I had just been shot, I think, and had a finger amputated and was falling back in my chair, and Kiefer Sutherland was about to rush in and rescue me. 6 months later, he came in, picked up the chair, and we started off. But at that point, I'd given up hope I thought, this is cursed. I'll just keep coming and going when it makes sense. And so we've lived in Stratford, as I say, for all this time. And LA and New York are very expensive. Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal are very expensive for people whose careers are as skittish and insecure as ours are. So it made a kind of sense. We were very close to Pearson Airport back in the good old days. You could get there in about an hour and 20 minutes. So it made sense. And sometimes we work across the street.
And how accurate is the depiction of Stratford in Slings and Arrows?
I'm afraid I'm not authorized to tell you. Because not only have I worked in Stratford for many, many years and seasons, I've worked in Slings and Arrows. Look, the people who wrote and created it and directed and acted in it are all very familiar with how Stratford works. I wouldn't deny that it had very large swaths of recognizable stuff in it. I'm pretty sure Stephen Ouimet was channeling Richard Manette as his ghost artistic director. And, all those people were magnificent in it, tongues firmly planted in cheeks. But they did reflect some of the problems that institutions like this have. So, yeah, sort of, I guess,
like
is my cagey.
The problems being intimacy, big characters, incestuousness.
Well, you're on an island. I've always thought that the Stratford Island is a little like a Stephen King creation. There's a bubble that descends on you when you cross Shakespeare's, that's the village of Shakespeare, about 11 kilometers away, and stays over Stratford to the extent of St. Mary's out the west and Sebringville in the north. And it's just a kind of a zone of slightly different weirdness because the challenges are intense. The work is very, very difficult and demanding, and the relationships become, therefore, equally intense and demanding. We ask an awful lot of people here, but then we're asking a lot of our audiences. You are asking people to drive all the way here, pay a fair whack of dough to witness this stuff, and yeah, sometimes it makes people crazy, but it's my kind of crazy.
So let's go back to February and March of this year. You were scheduled to do Richard III. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to know how you were approaching the role, how it was going to be different from the way you played Richard III 23 years ago.
Thank you, 32.
32 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, why don't we start there? How were you thinking about it?
Well, actually, your last phrase is essentially a description of it. I was thinking about it. when 32 years ago I was doing it, I thought I knew it. I thought, this is, I was playing, what was I doing? It was 1988. I think I was playing Petruchio in The Taming of the Shrew, a very famous production that Richard Manette directed in the 1950s Italian. I was playing Athos in The Three Musketeers, all at the same time, and thought nothing of it. It was a kind of ridiculousness that youth and energy will give you. But what I thought I would build on this time, and I've been working on it now for a year and a half plus with Anthony Cimolino, the director, but certainly a great deal on my own, is that I have a number of advantages. So I'm very familiar with the text from 1988. I'm very familiar with the story. I've also had the benefit of playing all the other parts. And each one adds a layer of understanding and, okay, relax. You've learned something here. Don't work too hard on that. There's no dividends paid, but work very hard on this. And the thing I'm working very hard on now is simplicity, the confidence of this character, that Shakespeare was doing something he'd rarely done, in fact, never done, and no other playwright had ever thought to do. The leading character walks on, the first words out of his mouth are, hey, guess what? I'm going to wreck everything, and you're in on it with me, okay? Watch this. I know I'm going to kill all the boring people. We're going to have some fun. Here we go. That's never been done. Never been done. But I've been balancing Shakespeare's Thomas Morean slander of the real historical Richard III with a massive amount of research about the real historical Richard III and the fact that I now have his autopsy report. I know what his bones look like. So I know what his deformity was. And I know that Shakespeare took it very, very carefully and legitimately. So I know how to be correct. I have more information than Burbage had. He had no idea the body was buried in a parking lot in Leicester. But I have the CT scan, and I've examined it. And so, endless biographies that have said, listen, this guy was a remarkable administrator, absolutely concerned with justice and fairness for all the little people. He was sent off as the lieutenant of his brother, Edward IV, to the north to basically keep the north in check. He was a great ruler. There's a lot of debate about Henry VII's Richmond taking over from him. And indeed, in the north, they wept for it for years after that. So there's a lot of stuff there that I can bring to shade my understanding, not only just of the text, but Shakespeare's intention. Because, well, here's what Shakespeare did. Although he stole most of it from Thomas More and wrote some of it out verbatim, just went, oh, this is a great scene, saves me a lot of bother there. He was absolutely delightfully vague and ambiguous about a lot of things in a lot of places, which allows the actor and the director and the company to go, yeah, we think he's just the evil villain who murdered his, princely nephews in the tower and got his just comeuppance because he wasn't ready for the job. But let's just say for a second, he's a very conflicted human being who made a couple of disastrous choices, and we can then look at it from evil within, evil without, the evil shape that made people respond to him in a certain way, and the fact that it is such a current story. That is to say, right. Here's a person who should not be leading this country. How did it happen? Well, he lied, he cheated, and he dissembled. Ring any bells?
So was Trump weighing on you as you were preparing for the role? And is that a burden or an opportunity?
I think it's an opportunity. Because in addition to reading, 1,000 biographies and all of the Stephen Greenblatt, from Tyrant to Will in the World and everything I can get by Rick Wilson, everything Trump touches dies, I'm also throwing in a good dollop of Doris Kearns Goodwin, Leadership in Turbulent Times, looking at Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Lyndon Johnson. And all that kind of stuff is grist for the mill in terms of understanding how people might behave when this was going well. And the difficulties of leadership, the difficulties of justice and citizenship and responsibility, all that kind of stuff. This is going to make it infinitely richer. Trump is going to be a footnote to history. I'm hoping sooner rather than later. But he tells us a great deal, as does all of the right-wing populist takeovers in various countries around the world, about the dangers and the fragility of the system that we're in at the moment, and how very mindful and careful we have to be. We're just going to do a play by Shakespeare. But we trust the intelligence of our audience to go, That's a very useful phrase. That tells this story. The play's 400 and get how many years old? Looks like not much has changed. And so I'm hopeful that the addition of those many, many layers with a Herculean fit body, which I'm working on with my athletic, elite athlete daughter in the basement, that I will have the stamina to do something. As I said to you earlier, when Richard was my age, he'd been dead for 30 years. It's a bit of a tough hill to climb.
So I hear you say that you are going to perform this play, and when we perform it, and let's go back to March, to when you realized that the world was about to go on lockdown and it wasn't going to happen as you imagined. How have you been coping with all of that?
Well, we sort of followed the many stages of grief as this unfolded, and Theresa Tam and the Prime Minister let us know what was appropriate in terms of how we would move forward. And I think Stratford was particularly aggressive in their decisions about how to do. They thought, let's lead the way here. We need to shut this down. We're not sure for how long. So we went home on that first Monday thinking, maybe a couple of weeks, the end of the week, maybe we can all do this on Zoom, we can talk. And as it progressed and the news became increasingly dire, we all started to meet in the street at some distance as we all walked around the lake trying to, keep the mind alive. We began to realize, the members of the company, that it was a much graver situation, and that in fact, if you wanted to threaten the life of the theater, a pandemic was the perfect thing with which to do it. And that was a sobering discovery for us all, because we then realized, now into week 3 and week 4, we're not coming back. Even the best projections of the best scientists would say, and you're looking at Bill Gates and Fauci and all of the world, never mind our great Canadian leaders in the fields, but all of the world saying, no, we're not doing this anytime soon. That's led to a different kind of acceptance that we're shut down, anticipation, a lot of speculation about how we might come back, when we might come back, what are the circumstances that would make that even imaginable, never mind actually possible. And although we see, little glimmers of openings up here in the hinterlands of southwestern Ontario, culturally we're still Chernobyl, right? It's we depend on this work. We employ, I say we corporately. I was just working there for this season, but Stratford employs more than 3,000 people. They're the biggest employer in the town. They bring 135 million into the town, 55 million in taxes, and the list goes on. So without any of that, the circumstances, not only for all of my friends and colleagues, but for the town itself, is dire. I mean, for my friends and colleagues, our problem is that many of us, a la Slings and Arrows, are 2 artist households. We've come here, we've grown together, we've worked together, we've interbred, we're all in this together. So we're all out of work with no prospect of returning. And keep in mind what returning would mean. Social distancing, I have to say, with all due respect to the concept, is fabulous for everything else. It is death for the theater. We need 2,000 people, 600 people, 1,100 people, 250 people in our various theaters to sit close together, to watch us do what we do, and pay for the privilege. We also need to sit very close to each other in intimate settings with dressers, stage managers, crew, and rehearsals with all of our colleagues. Now keep in mind, when we started Richard III, our company is, he said, hopefully, extraordinary. But it ranges from an 11-year-old who's come in to play one of the princes to the not quite 11-year-old Martha Henry and everyone in between. Magnificence we have on every level. But when we looked in the early stages of this, do we dare put Martha at risk or me? I am in a vulnerable position. as a senior player. Do we dare? Can we take that responsibility? And then can we take the responsibility of asking an audience to come and share it with us? So in the optimist view of it, I've decided to continue the work, to continue the focus on doing exactly as I described to you, believing that someday I will do this at the completely new, architecturally brilliant Tom Patterson Theatre, whose stage is, let me tell you, something so intimate and spectacular. I've been on it. It was dusty and horrible, but it's beautiful. That I will be there someday, and if not me, someone will be there, and you will be able to come and share it. But that time is not September. It's probably not January. I don't know when it is, and I am not in any position to be able to say. I can only tell you that from the point of view of most of my colleagues and friends, the kind of work we do does not allow you to rest on your laurels and put it on the shelf and say, oh, I won't play that instrument for 8 months, a year and a half, and then I'll just come back to it. Rehearsals are never long enough to actually be good at this. It takes so much more work and discipline and stamina. And so consequently, like Yo-Yo Ma, whom I imagine, like Casals, plays a Bach cello suite every single morning, I'm doing just that to keep the embouchure, to keep ready. And I hope I get a chance to show what we've learned.
Amen. I'm very interested in how people are accessing culture now, and the need to experience something collectively that is transformative and powerful has not gone away, even though this virus means we can't congregate. There's a sort of illicit stand-up comedy situation happening in the park around the corner from my house. Late at night, some guy brings a microphone and a floodlight, and people, the jokes are not great, but people are just so thrilled to be laughing together, even at a distance. And there's a brass quintet that plays on weekends, and a kind of whisper network of cultural pop-ups. And I'm wondering what you're seeing along those lines, if Stratford has any of that going on, or if you've seen other things even online that are scratching the itch. And, we are inventive people, and what's happening out there?
Well, there's a lot of people doing a lot of different things. Obviously, Zoom should have invested in that. Is absolutely, one of the most useful tools now in people congregating, getting together, doing discussions, having forums, reading plays. I read my friend Roy Lewis's play with a gang of people not too long ago. Just allowing people to continue moving forward and getting the work done. Rebecca Northam is an improvisation wizard here in Stratford. She was doing a live show every Friday night and is still doing it, called Mimi Live. And she's interviewing now. Unfortunately, she has to do actors. Usually it's normal people in a bar or theater setting. And now she's been reduced to actors. Can you imagine? And it's tough on her. But she's also doing street theater here. She has a small troupe, and some of the members of the company, the Stratford company, they were going to be doing a show here, an improvisational Shakespeare. And they've offered their services to anyone who wants to pay a small fee, and they will play in your driveway for you and your neighbors, on a porch here and a porch there, and where you can gather. And the city has, in a very enlightened way, given them license to, within a very prescribed way, play in daylight between, say, 7 and 8, not before and not after, and entertain and do a bit of Shakespeare, and they have a menu. You pick a kids show, you pick a semi-adult show, and on from there. So that's the kind of thing that's popping up here. But, that's not much. I think a lot of my friends are reading a great deal more. They're watching all those films and television shows that they promised themselves they would do in their retirement and haven't even begun. And some are taking on new projects. They're looking at writing. They're looking at, writing music, learning music, doing all kinds of engaged things. But I think the fundamental problem that we have as theater artists, as well as all of the other work that we do, is that we're touch-starved. Our communities are touch-starved. We depend on the kindness of strangers. We need to be in a room together. We need to smell each other. We need to laugh with each other. We need to cry with each other. We need to experience and learn from each other. Is that funny? I don't know. I didn't think that was funny, but I find myself going along and being, moved through these cathartic experience of what it is to be human, which is why we're working so hard on it. That has to happen communally. I cannot believe, because it's such a fundamental human instinct, and I see it as a slightly religious experience, that's why religion works. If we can come together and pray together, not my thing, but I will come together and Richard III together. And we will Hamlet, and we will Chicago, and we will All's Well That Ends Well together. And that will move us all forward. And we'll be able to touch each other. Right now, it's super weird. It's kind of it's very East Germany. There's a sort of Stasi of viral distancing. Everybody's worried. Everybody's masked. We all look like criminals. You go into a bank, and you're going to hold the place up. Hi, Bob. How you doing? And you think, wait a minute, I was in disguise. Clearly not. So I think that we are making a few attempts, but none of them are going to be, they're not going to change the world. We are never going to do a 3,000 member Zoom call and have a play impact people in the same way. I think that Netflix is taking great advantage of the fact that we are stuck on our own or in small groups to say, I know you still need us. Let us deliver whatever we can. Umbrella Academy will come July 30th, he said, plugging that. But, the bottom line is, it's not the same thing. It forms part of our cultural habit, but it's not always the most satisfying part.
So I'm going to ask you one final question and then leave you to get back to your rosé. I realize that you are an actor with the company rather than in charge of its future. But at the moment, Stratford is making a big appeal to the government to get support, financial support, to survive this mess. And they're in a long line of people looking to get money from the government because of the economic devastation of the virus. If it was your job to make a case for why Stratford deserves the taxpayer dollar and support during this time when there's so many competing interests, what would your strongest argument be for its necessity in the world?
Well, it's actually pretty straightforward and rather easy to do. Here's the thing. Stratford is a victim of its own success. For 67 odd years, the business model that they've adopted has worked perfectly well. They get 4 to 5, possibly 6% in a good year of their money from government. So next to nothing. They are entirely box office and donor dependent. And so here's the problem. No box office, no donors, we got nothing, right? 4%. Just enough to, hire a lawyer to shut the place down and say, well, we sewed that up nicely. I hope it'll make a nice roller rink in the future. So here's the thing. We go to the government and we say very simply and very obviously, as I said, this town is now a cultural Chernobyl. Every restaurant, dry cleaners, B&B, hotel, you name it, walk-by business depends on 250,000 to 500,000 tourists wandering through. We have 5,000 to 10,000 people a day here doing silly things like paying taxes, supporting the economy, and generating Lord knows how much goodwill around the globe. So the pitch is this. All right, guys, you're handing out money left and right and center. You've got a lot of people to please. But we are a not-for-profit organization who have always managed more or less on our own. We need you now in an extraordinary circumstance to help us get through this extraordinary circumstance. That's all. We don't want your help forever because you're not Germany. You're not enlightened enough for that. You don't support the arts in the way that a European thinks, of course my little town has an opera company, an orchestra, and a theater. Of course they do. We don't think like that. Okay, fine. But if we're going to pitch this, we're pitching on our quality, our ability, our professionalism, and on our record. 67 years of getting it right in this particular way. So what we'd say to you is, we need you now. Tomorrow, with your help today, we won't need you. But we have a lot of hurdles. And the biggest one is, can we safely, responsibly ask people to come back into a room, not just to watch us, but to work together to make this possible? I believe that Prime Minister Trudeau and Dr. Theresa Tam do think that this will be possible and in the foreseeable future. And then the biggest artistic institution in the country that is the funnel for all the best people coming through and the zenith of their achievement for most of them, and sending the men off around the world to carry our banner throughout as Canadians, never mind Stratfordians and Shakespeare Festivalians. No, to carry us forward as Canadian artists and say, look what we've done. Look how extraordinary we are. Today, we need your help. That's how I'd start.
That's pretty convincing. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing all your thoughts. Good luck during this most unusual summer. And I look forward to seeing your Richard III when we get a chance to be together in person. And thanks to our audience for joining us tonight. Please come back for another This City Live with Toronto Life. Thanks so much and have a good night.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care,
Bye.
Sarah. Ciao.